Hello ladies and gents, happy Valentine's Day. Now today's video is going to be a little bit more thematic than previous videos that have gone up on the channel, but it's still going to be essentially a historical anniversary vlog, because on this day, the 14th of February, St Valentine's Day in 1316, there was so you'll sometimes hear it referred to as a battle. Really, it's nothing more than a skirmish, to be honest with you, at a place called Skaithmuir, which is right on the border between England and Scotland. It's about here on our map, just to the west of Barrack, which is there, right on the very east coast. Now, the earliest record we have of this skirmish, this encounter, actually comes from a petition sent by the garrison of Berwick, right there on the coast, right where the River Tweed meets the North Sea. A petition from the garrison at Berwick to King Edward II of England. And in this petition, the garrison claim that a portion of the garrison had, without permission and without orders, recently gone on a foraging expedition to Melrose. Melrose is about there-ish on our map. And on the way back, these men who had gone out on this unsanctioned foray into southern Scotland had been attacked, and 80 of them had been killed. Pretty serious loss for the garrison at Berwick. So the petition was essentially asking the king to send them more men and preferably more supplies, because part of the reason that these men had gone out without permission to go foraging was because the garrison were running dangerously low on supplies. Among the dead there in 1316, according to the petition, was a Gascon knight, a knight from Gascony, or rather a man-at-arms. It's not clear that he was a knight in the petition, and actually the implication from the petition would seem to suggest that he isn't. But anyway, he was from Gascony, and he was called, well, I'm going to pronounce it Raymond Caillou, okay? And I will write it in the description somewhere. If anyone wants to correct me on my pronunciation of that name, I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. But for the time being, I'm going to say Caillou. Bear that name in mind, Raymond Caillou, because it will come up a little bit later on in the video. So, there we have fairly near contemporary, or in fact almost exactly contemporary, evidence of this battle taking place, this skirmish, this engagement taking place on St Valentine's Day in 1316. Berwick, it's worth pointing out, while now technically in England, it had been the first Scottish town to be occupied by the English when the English invaded in 1296. So by 1316 it's been occupied for 20 years, but as far as the Scots are concerned, Berwick is still part of Scotland. It's still a target to be recovered. So this attack on this portion of the garrison that leaves Barrack in early 1316, and indeed the supply problems that the garrison had been having, were all part of an ongoing campaign against English-occupied Barrack on the part of the Scots. Now, the original petition doesn't actually say where this encounter took place. Obviously, it's somewhere between Barrack and Melrose, and the impression that's given in the petition is that the garrison get to Melrose and on their way back are jumped by the Scots. It's not until 1360 that Sir Thomas Grey of Heaton, who is kind of a local, he's from Northumberland, the most northeasterly county in England, Thomas Grey of Heaton, in his Scala Chronica, his Ladder Chronicle, claims that the skirmish took place at Skaithmuir, which, as I say, it's near Coldstream, just right along the border there. As is often the case with these relatively small-scale engagements and encounters in the First War of Scottish Independence, we get our most detailed, vivid and dramatic presentation of the Battle of Skaithmuir, to give it that quite grandiose title, from John Barber in The Bruce. My boy Barber gives us quite a detailed version of events for Skaithmuir in 1316. Now we have to be careful about taking him too much at his word. He is of course writing some 60 years after the event, in the mid 1370s, and one thing we can immediately say in terms of his accuracy, he actually misnames Caillou. Remember I mentioned Richard Caillou, one of the a Gascon knight mentioned as one of the casualties at Skaithmuir in the original Petition. In The Bruce, he becomes the leader of this foraging party, and he is identified by Barber by the name of Edmund Caillou, although Barber does still identify him as being a Gascon. So, Barber's version of events has the English emerge from Berwick for their foraging raid, and has Sir James Douglas, one of Barber's heroes of course, at the time sitting in Ettrick Forest, which is in this sort of area, in the Middle March, just bordering on the East March, which is where Melrose and Berwick and so forth are. And as usual, Douglas is waiting at Ettrick Forest, looking for opportunities to upset the English, to harass them, to interfere with the proper running of those areas still occupied by them. And he receives intelligence that a small English foraging party has left Barrack and is rustling cattle basically in the area around Melrose. And when Douglas hears this, he of course gathers his men and goes racing off to try and catch these Englishmen before they can get back to Berwick. However, it turns out that Douglas's intelligence is somewhat flawed, and this small raiding party that he has heard of is in fact one of several small raiding parties that all coalesce back together in order to get back to Berwick. So when Douglas finds this English raiding party, it is in fact much bigger than he was expecting, and it in fact outnumbers his own company, his own force. Douglas unfortunately doesn't realise this until the English have spotted him, until it's too late really for him to make a run for it, because if he does, the English will chase after him and they might very well overtake him and wipe him out. So Douglas basically turns to his men and says, look, we're going to have to fight. Now, to kind of awkwardly tie it into this whole Valentine's Day thing, somewhat unusually in this passage, when Barber is describing Douglas's address to his men before the fighting starts at Skaithmuir, it's not unusual for Barber to have his hero address the men and give them some kind of confidence-boosting speech before battle is met, as it were. But unusually in this case, among the advice that Douglas gives to his men is a statement to think on your lemon. Lemon means, well, it can have a few meanings, but it essentially means sweetheart or lover. Sometimes it can mean mistress as well, but the meaning here seems to be sweetheart, seems to be you know, your special gal back home, and you know, remember them to give you strength on the battlefield, to inspire you to succeed. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is because Barbara is aware that this is happening on St Valentine's Day, because I don't really think in the medieval period that association of Valentine's Day and kind of romantic love was anything like it is now. It's just a kind of interesting coincidence, I think. Although, again, do feel free to mention in the comments if you know of any other examples of late medieval associations of St Valentine with romantic love and so forth. Maybe Barbara's doing that. He doesn't identify the date, it has to be said. He doesn't mention that it's happening on Valentine's Day, but it is sort of odd from a modern perspective, I guess, that on this occasion, and really this occasion alone, Douglas happens to encourage his men by having them think of their sweethearts, their Valentines, before heading into battle. Anyway, the two sides clash, and of course the Scots fight bravely, but the English superior numbers, do start to tell against the Scots. When Douglas sees his men flagging, though, he falls back on what Barber claims is a common tactic that he uses in cases like this. When things are going wrong, when it looks like the Scots might be overwhelmed, Douglas zeroes in on the English commander, in this case Raymond Caillou, and fights his way through towards him and kills him. And when the English see this, the fight drains out of them, they lose their morale altogether, they're horrified that their commander's been killed, and the English army starts to break apart and flee, and the Scots achieve victory. And Barber gives us a little digression then on the fact that this is something that Douglas has done before and has often thought about. I would suggest that in making that point, Barber is probably repeating an idea that he has come across in conversation with the kinds of men who Barber is addressing, men like Archibald de Graham or William First Earl of Douglas or George Dunbar, Earl of March, these Marcher lords who we do know were, or can say with a reasonable degree of certainty, were part of his expected readership. Some of them may indeed have been patronising his work, or at least encouraging him with his work. And so that perhaps we're seeing here not just Barber's understanding of how the Battle of Skaithmuir was won, but perhaps we're seeing Barber encoding a little bit of contemporary military thinking into his poem and ascribing this to Douglas, either to give the impression that whoever it is that's told him that this is what contemporary military men do when things are going badly, that their ideas are equivalent with those of the near legendary James Douglas, or else to encourage his audience, those men who are reading this, to bear that in mind if they ever find themselves in a similar position. So, ladies and gents, I think that's about it for me today. Thank you very much for listening. I guess the thought I'll leave you with is that however bad your St Valentine's Day is going today, if the worst comes to the worst, at least remember it can't be as bad as poor Raymond Caillou's was in 1316. Thank you very much, ladies and gents. I hope you've enjoyed that.